I'm just going to talk about some financial metrics and how we can maybe think about incorporating them into the financial reporting as well. So the way that I sort of think about spend and, if you like, segmenting reporting, it's not just spend, it's also income as well, but I like to think about investment in the business in sort of three buckets. And every pound you spend falls into one of the three, to be honest with you. So the first one is product and operations. And this is really around, okay, so you've acquired the customer, they've bought something from you. Right, now how efficient are we at actually delivering that product or service to the customer? So great marketing, great job on sales, perfect, we've closed the customer. Now we actually need to make some money when we deliver it to the customer. So this is the key metric in any business across the whole world, to be honest with you. There isn't a single business that this metric isn't good for, which is gross profit margin, which is very simply how much are you selling your product or service for? Product in this case, as an e-commerce founder, how much are you selling your product for? And what is it costing you to build that product, to create that product, to get it shipped, etc. So all of the costs around the manufacturing, the packaging, the shipping costs from wherever you haven't had it made to your warehouse, all of those costs go into your cost of goods sold, which form part of your gross margin. Typically, when we look at a business and we're trying to improve a business, this is one of the areas where there's a huge amount of value to be had. So there's lots of wastage, because in an e-commerce business, most of your costs are either in product costs or marketing. Those are the two areas really where there's lots of value. So really optimizing those direct costs and think about your product costs is really key. And then aside from that, staff operations and discretionary spend, which is less important, less big, if you like, for a lot of e-commerce businesses, because most of e-commerce businesses these days are run quite light, asset light in terms of staff and discretionary spend outside of marketing and product. So but having some metrics around that is still really important, and managing that discretionary spend well just keeps your operating margin really healthy. The next bucket I just want to talk about is growth costs. So I mentioned this briefly a second ago. So sales, marketing, and product dev. What is it costing us to acquire a customer? So some metrics I've got here are things like opportunity to win ratio, which is very similar to some of the metrics that Kareem mentioned as well on sort of the checkout. Is when someone lands, how many of those people are we actually winning? How's the conversion looking? It's all about conversion, right? And optimizing that conversion funnel. Really key metric. The one that I love as well, which I think kind of never lies really if we have the assumptions right, is the acquisition cost to lifetime value, CAC to LTV, which you probably hear lots of people talk about. It's a ratio of how much is it costing me to acquire a customer versus what the lifetime value of the customer is. Now, if that is a positive metric, so 2 to or more than 1 to 1, ideally 3 to 1 or higher, then you're really building a really good, sustainable, growing business. So as long as you can continue to fund your business, to fund the growth, fund the marketing, fund the working capital, you'll continue to grow and have a successful business. So really important ratio. As are things like cost per lead. So how much is it costing me to get people to go to my site and add something to my cart? And aside from that as well, obviously, you've got to keep an eye on product development too, right? So lots of e-commerce businesses, as you know, we're launching a product, we get it out there, we sell it, but at the same time, we have to be innovative as well and launch new products. And making sure that we are managing that investment in a really good way, I think is really important. So a lot of that might be R&D, research and development, but some of it may be, we know what we want to make, we're going to go ahead and actually create that new product. Making sure that that's fully budgeted and you've got a project spend tracker on product development is really important. I've seen quite a lot of businesses that have one really good product and then they go to build and create some new products and they end up overspending on the new products, and it actually kind of can destroy this great thing that you've built already because you had this great first product which worked really well and you've gone and spent all the profit on this new product which didn't work out so well. So I think making sure you're keeping an eye on the project spend tracking on new products is really important. So those metrics really are measuring the return on investment of marketing, which is key. So they're less micro to some of the metrics that Kareem talked about, which is around optimizing people on your website, etc. And more when we're talking about perhaps in the boardroom, financial reporting wise, these are the kind of metrics we would look at. And the third one, which is not always relevant for e-commerce, but is absolutely for some, especially as the business matures and you start to get much bigger and maybe bring some manufacturing in-house, for example, is capital investment as well. So perhaps you buying a new machine to manufacture your product, for example. Okay, great. So we're going to bring manufacturing in-house. What's the payback period? Is it actually a good business case? How does that, in that payback period, obviously you'll have a business case model that ideally would bring in how much is it going to cost me to actually build this manufacturing plant? How much do I save versus outsourcing the manufacturing? And when do I get my money back? What's the net present value, etc. So net present value of future cash flows is effectively what is that worth over time, me investing in this project. So if I bring my manufacturing in-house, how much additional shareholder value is that going to create? And that's really what net present value of future cash flows is. And then there's another way of looking at it as well, which is the annual return on investment. So if I invest £10,000 in a new machine, how much additional profit does that generate? And therefore, what's my return on investment? So knowing those things, I think, is just really important. Now, I'm not going into loads of detail about how to calculate them or how it works. But whenever you're thinking about product or operation, so shipping a product to a customer, it's really about optimizing your margin there. That's really important. Acquiring a customer, really important to make sure that you're not overspending on that, and that's efficient, because that's the quickest way to go out of business, is spend too much money on acquiring customers. And then if you are doing anything slightly bigger around capital investment, know that it's a good business case, it's got a payback period, and it's going to increase shareholder value ultimately. Those are the three areas really within any business that I look at, and I think that's a really good way of looking at these things, and make sure that you're just conscious of them, and making sure you're always trying to optimize them. If you fly blind, sometimes you can kind of cause a bit of a problem for yourself, and before you know, you've run out of cash. Anyway, thanks for that. Thanks, Stace. Next one. So the 5 metrics that will tell whether your business is healthy, not just busy. Your gross margin, so I touched on this previously before, how much profit is left after direct costs. So that's something you definitely need in your board pack. Operating costs, now this can be expressed as a percentage of sales, what it takes to keep the lights on. So running the business outside of shipping the product, what's that as a percentage of revenue? Now some of that's fixed, so that's more difficult to manage. But as long as it's something which is ultimately resulting in a strong operating profit or EBITDA, then I think that's a good baseline. This is a massive one. I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail. Inventory days. So how long is your inventory or stock sat in your warehouse or in your office for a smaller e-commerce business? How long is that stock sat there before it's sold? Because that's cash tied up that we could be doing something else with. Really, really key metric. Debtor days too. Now, of course, if you're purely D2C, then and you're purely selling online, purely e-commerce, then this is less of a consideration because you get your cash fairly quickly. It might take a few days through Stripe or any of the other sort of payment gateways you're using, but fairly quick, to be honest with you. But if you're selling wholesale, then that's a completely different story, and that's a consideration that really needs thoughtful planning and a really important one to manage, which all leads into really the inventory and the debtors into the cash gap. So cash gap really is your working capital cycle. So how long is cash tied up in your working capital before it is freed up again for reinvestment? And that's a really, really important thing that I talk about a lot. And we work on a lot with a lot of our clients as well, in addition. We're always looking to optimize their cash flow. Lots of growing businesses that are just bewildered because they're profitable, their revenue's growing, things are going really well, but they don't have any cash whatsoever. And this is the cash gap, and it's a balance which is always tricky, but if it's managed well, and like I said, if you're very thoughtful about it, there are ways of managing this. So I think we've got a slide next which explains this in a bit more detail. So I just want to talk you through one example of this. So again, this is a business it's a consumer product business with actually selling wholesale. There is still a cash gap if you're selling purely online as well. But in this example, it's a wholesale business. So the first thing is 0 days. You bought the goods from your supplier. The goods are received in the warehouse. The assumption here is that they're actually giving us credit, right? So we get the goods. 30 days later, this is often not the case for a younger business or a small e-commerce business. They often have to pay up front. But anyway, in this case, 30 days later, a payment is made to a supplier. So that's sort of best case scenario. Great, got the goods, got 30 days. 45 days later, the customer actually buys some of that inventory. So maybe it's taken you a little while to repackage it or organize it, get ship it to the right warehouse, etc. And then you've actually got to acquire the customer too. So 45 days later, the customer actually orders something and the goods are shipped. And again, this is a wholesale order. And then often there may be a 60-day period then until you actually receive your cash from the customer. So you can see here, there's quite a big cash flow gap. So from you paying your supplier 30 days after delivery, all the way to you getting the payment from your customer 75 days later in this case, because they've paid late. 60-day terms where they've actually paid late. So the cash flow gap there is huge. So even if you're profitable and your business is growing really, really well, you can see how that is a massive drain on your cash flow and just makes it absolutely impossible to continue to trade. And oftentimes, if this isn't managed properly and sort of facilities aren't in place to manage this, you can't grow anymore. And you actually end up shrinking because there's no cash available to acquire those next batch of customers. Or perhaps there's no inventory. You haven't got any stock anymore because you've sold it all and you haven't got the cash yet to buy the new inventory, or there's a lead time. So optimizing all of these things is really important. So optimizing when you pay your suppliers, when the inventory is coming in, when you're shipping to your customers, and when your customers pay you. Really important. And the lifeblood really of any e-commerce business and consumer goods business. In addition, what we do with a lot of customers is, now it depends when the stage of the customer, of course. Often earlier stage e-commerce businesses will probably raise some equity, so that really helps with this cash flow gap. So that helps them buy their inventory up front. It helps them cover any inventory day lag, etc., and any payment terms from customers. But that only goes so far. And at some point, once that equity is deployed and it's tied up in your working capital, then you need more. All right, it's a constant. If you're growing, you always need more. And so what we put in place for a lot of customers at Edition are things like stock financing facilities. So a bank or a lender will give you credit to buy your stock. So you're not having to ship out your own cash, your own equity, your hard-earned money on paying your suppliers for the stock. The bank says we'll do that for you, of course, for free, for a margin and for some interest. But that really helps. And then at the other end, you can also finance, if you are selling wholesale, those invoices to those customers too. So that 60, 75 day lag, you can actually get financing from an invoice financing provider to cover that cycle as well. So what you end up with is, if you've got a working capital set up with debt facilities on both sides, and again, this is where it really needs to be managed well, you can continue to scale because you're utilizing the facilities that are in place rather than having to use equity all the time. So I think, and I feel quite strongly about this for consumer goods businesses and brands. If you really, really want to scale, honestly, I think the only way and the best way, in my opinion, if the business is actually proven and it's profitable, is doing it with debt. doing it with equity is kind of expensive because you're just raising equity for it to be sat in on your balance sheet and working capital. So really we want to use debt for that sort of stuff. That's a scary word, of course, but that's where a really good, experienced CFO can come in handy. So if you are at the point where you're thinking about putting debt into your business to manage your working capital and optimize this, make sure you've got a really strong finance person in place who's going to help you manage that, to make sure that you're not overdrawing on the facility, that you've got a really solid cash flow forecast that shows that you can repay the debts on time, etc. And of course, keeping on top of that growth cycle as well and customer acquisition. So if you are going to do this, definitely get a CFO in place or somebody who understands this stuff, really strong senior accountant or finance manager, somebody needs to be in place to manage that stuff. But if you want to see how we manage this addition with our customers, we'd love to show you. And we're offering a free one-on-one financial workshop for all webinar attendees. So if you want to get in touch and say, do you know what, I'm seeing this problem either with optimizing my funnel, my website, or with managing your working capital and your cash flow, we'd love to talk to you and love to help you if we can. And yeah, we're offering a free workshop. So please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.